Amen. Thanks, Matt. Hey, we are in part 3 of a series called Beyond Belief. And as we've been going through the series, I've been telling a little bit of a lady, Joni's story each week. And I'm going to share a little bit of her story now. But just to catch you up, in case you've missed the last couple of weeks or your first time here or whatnot, Joni essentially was a young, fit teenager. She had a boyfriend. She was an athlete. She had a life in front of her. And one day she dove into a lake and hit her head and became a quadriplegic. And then the week 2, we talked about how she was praying and going along to healing crusades, believing for a miracle, and her miracle hadn't come yet. And so let me just continue Joni's story. It says, by her early 20s, Joni was facing a crisis that went far deeper than physical paralysis. The constant prayers, the faith healing services, the well-meaning advice from other Christians, none of it had changed her condition. Worse, she was beginning to feel like a spiritual failure. Maybe I don't have enough faith, she would think in her darkest moments. Maybe God is punishing me for something. Maybe I'm not good enough for a miracle. The questions that plagued her were the same ones that torment anyone who has prayed earnestly for something that never comes. Is God really listening? Does he care? Is he powerful enough but choosing not to help? Or worse, is he simply not there at all? Some of the darkest moments came when she would hear testimonies of healing from others. At church, people would share about answered prayers for everything from healed backs to financial miracles to restored relationships. Each testimony, while wonderful for the person sharing it, felt like salt in Joni's wounds. Why them and not me, she wondered. Even worse were the Christians who continued to insist that healing was just around the corner if she could muster more faith. Have you truly surrendered everything to God? They would ask. Are you claiming the promises? The implication was always the same. The lack of healing was somehow her fault. Joni found herself caught between two equally painful possibilities. Either God wasn't good, he had the power to heal her, but he was choosing not to, or God wasn't real, and all her prayers were just words spoken into an empty universe. The depression was overwhelming at times. Joni would wake up exhausted before the day even began, facing another 24 hours of being trapped in a body that felt more like a prison than a home. The chronic pain, the dependence on others for the most basic tasks, the isolation of being different, it all felt too much to bear. Lord, I don't have the strength to go on, she would pray in desperation. I cannot do another day of being a quadriplegic. And yet she continued to pray, not with the bright hope of her early years in the wheelchair, but with a raw, honest desperation. She was wrestling with God like Jacob in the Old Testament, refusing to let go even when the struggle left her wounded. And yet she continued to pray. Oh, I've read that part. When Joni didn't realize during these dark years was that this wrestling match was preparing her for something she couldn't yet see. God wasn't absent during her struggle. He was working in the darkness, preparing to reveal a truth that would change everything. But first, she would have to let go of the miracle she wanted to receive in order to receive the one that she never knew she needed. If you want to hear how it ends, you've got to be back next week for part 4. But hey, we're in the series Beyond Belief, and it's all about miracles. And in week 1, we looked at the relationships between miracles and Christianity. And the reality is you can't have a Christian faith without believing in miracles. And when we defined a miracle as this, that a miracle is the temporary suspension or reversal of the laws of nature. And in week 1, we talked about as being a Christian, you've got to believe in at least 2 miracles. One of them, I think pretty much everyone in the room already believes in. So look, you're most of the way there anyway. And we just said that a miracle has to be this supernatural reversal of the laws of nature. And so that means a lot of things that we use language really loosely today, right? We'll define something as a miracle that's not really a miracle. You know, like, he remembered my birthday. It's a miracle. It's like, no. It's just an iPhone alert, right? And we'll often define things as a miracle that aren't really a miracle, but for something to really be a miracle, it requires that temporary suspension of the laws of nature. And lastly, we talked about just the glorious yet infuriating ways of God. That God can work miracles, and it's so glorious and just awe-inspiring and wow. But it can also be infuriating because there doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason as to when He does them or why He does them. But we landed on the fact that miracles are at God's discretion in order to accomplish God's purposes. That miracles are performed at God's discretion. We can't manipulate Him. He is not so weak that we can twist His arm into performing a miracle for us when we want Him to. He is not so stupid that we can trick Him into something by manipulating Him in what we do in order to get what we want. No, miracles are at God's discretion, and they're there to accomplish God's purposes. And today I want to speak specifically to those of us in the room who have prayed for a miracle and never seen that miracle take place. Maybe you're in a place right now where you're praying wholehearted prayers and you're believing for a miracle and you still haven't seen something change. Maybe you've been through something and you prayed 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 for the miracle, but the miracle never came. And you don't understand why. I think there's a lot of us in the room that have been in that place, maybe are in that place. I think all of us, as we go through life, are going to find ourselves in that place. And so we want to talk about it today. Today we're going to talk about a man called John the Baptist. And I've talked about this story actually about 2 or 3 years ago when we did a series called Walking Through the Shadows. So if you were there then and you remember this, I've done a really good job. If you don't, hopefully maybe today you will. And if you weren't there, then perfect. But we were talking about a man called John the Baptist. And let me just introduce you to John the Baptist by describing him the way that Jesus described him. I just want you to understand who he was. And talking about John the Baptist, Jesus says this, I tell you the truth. Of all who have ever lived, none is greater than John the Baptist. He would, as my kids would say, been goated. He is the goat. And again, like it's one of these words, right? These slang words, you're the goat, this is the goat. He goes like, it's so out of context. If someone's going to be the GOAT, there can only be one, right? If you're going to be the greatest of all time, you're literally number one. Like, you can't be in the top 10 or the top 3 or the top 7. It's like, if you're the GOAT, you're the GOAT. So don't throw the GOAT on everything because they're not the GOAT. They're like one of 7 million. So it frustrates me. Just a problem with little slang. But one thing I love to do is, like young people these days, they have all these words. Right? And I love to throw them at my kids because they get so mad. And I'll be like, hey, Kayla, I'm Sigma, eh? Shut up, Dad. There's a guy on Instagram, his name's Ben, and I can't even remember what the rest of it is. But he goes to a drive-thru and he's dropping all the teenage slang with his teenagers in the back of the car. And it's just hilarious. And he's like, oh, could I just, if I had some Coke, that'd be pretty riz, eh? And it'd just be like, I think chicken would be a bit skibbity today. Could I go with, And then he's just dropping all the stuff and the kids are in the back freaking out. And so I like to do that. And the latest thing I've heard my kids say, I don't know what this means. My little netball girl's talking about this. 6-7, 6-7. Oh, let's go. 6-7, 6-7, 6-7. And then we're there and be like, oh man, so some Life Switch Cafe chips would slap right now. But I like to just say this to my kids because it gets them really mad. And they think the madder they get, the less I'm going to say it. But the opposite's true, right? The madder they get, the more I'm inspired to say it. But talking about John the Baptist, Jesus says he is the greatest. Of anyone born, there's none greater than John the Baptist. Of all who've ever lived, there's none greater than John the Baptist. John the Baptist was baptizing people in preparation for Jesus' arrival. He had a special sort of call from God as to what he was meant to do. He was the one who was to come and pave the way for Jesus' arrival. In fact, when John the Baptist was in his mother's womb and Jesus was in Mary's womb, and because there was the relationship between Elizabeth and Mary, and they came together and talked, the wombs just started jumping around. The kids got so excited. There was this connection between John the Baptist and Jesus right from when they were in the womb, that they were close. When John the Baptist saw Jesus, he says, "Here is the Lamb of God who's come to take away the sins of the world." We're talking about Jesus. The people came to John the Baptist because what he was doing was so incredible. And they said, "Are you the Messiah?" And then John said, "No, I'm not the Messiah. I'm not even worthy to tie his sandals." John the Baptist knew who Jesus was. He baptized him. He had an absolute certainty that he was the Lamb of God, the one who would come from God to take away the sin of the world. Jesus said he was the goat. I don't think that he was exaggerating like my kids do, but he was being serious. John the Baptist really is the greatest. And we get to the book of Matthew. Matthew's telling us about John the Baptist, and this is what he says. He says, John the Baptist, who was in prison. John the Baptist, this great man who Jesus loved, this man who knew who Jesus was, this man who Jesus clearly cared about, found himself in prison. And what's interesting about this is we get told why John the Baptist is in prison. If we jump across to one of the other gospel accounts, there's 4 accounts of Jesus' life in the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Mark actually gives us the backstory and tells us why John the Baptist, for the goat, was in prison. And this is what Mark records for us. He says, "For Herod had sent soldiers to arrest and imprison John as a favor to Herodas." Just tell you a little bit about who Herodas is. Herodas had been his brother Philip's wife, but Herod had married her. And you think your family's complicated. Okay? This guy, he had a brother. His brother had a wife. She was quite popular. She was very well liked. The brothers are in a bit of competition here to see who's going to take over and become the next ruler. He says, "Hey, everybody likes her. I want to be the next ruler. I've got a bit of favor. I'm going to go and steal her off my brother." And he does. Okay? So, complicated families. John had been telling Herod, "Hey, it is against God's law for you to marry your brother's wife." John's the one saying to him, "Hey, he's like, bro, not a good situation, right? This is not normal. This is not healthy. You should not be married to your brother's wife. This is not good." John had a bit of courage in terms of what he would say to people. So, because John was saying this, Herodas bore a grudge against him and wanted to kill John. But without Herod's approval, Herodas, was powerless. She couldn't do anything. She wanted to kill John, but she couldn't. She was powerless because Herod respected John. And Herod knew that John was a good and a holy man, so he protected him. So here's John in prison, not really for doing anything wrong, but for pointing out to someone, "Hey, mate, what you're doing is not good, not healthy. This is not right. This is not the way you should be living your life." Okay? So John's in prison. So John the Baptist, who was in prison, heard about all the things, the Messiah, all the things Jesus was doing. He's stuck in a prison cell. He hears about all the stuff that's going on out there, all the miraculous, all the incredible things Jesus is doing. And so John the Baptist sends his disciples to ask Jesus, "Are you the Messiah we've been expecting? Or should we keep looking for someone else?" See, here's John in a prison cell. He hears the stories of what's going on out there. John, who no doubt remembered the day when he was at the river when Jesus walked down and he baptized him. In the midst of him being stuck in his own prison, doubts start to creep in to the core of who he is. And he says, "Hang on a minute. I need to know, is Jesus really the Messiah?" I wonder if he was thinking, come on, if Jesus really was the Messiah, wouldn't he have my back? If Jesus really was the miracle worker that I thought he would be and that I hear stories of him doing, could he not work a miracle for me? Because here I am in prison and I don't even deserve to be here. Here I am chained up. Here I am stuck. Here I am isolated. And I've really done nothing wrong. If anyone deserves a miracle, isn't it Me, if anyone deserves freedom, isn't it me? And John does what we tend to do when we're in pain. Well, this is what you've done. This is what I've done when we're in pain, right? We narrow the world right down, almost to the size of our pain. And in fact, medical professionals will tell you that when you're in physical pain, that's so profound, that's so strong, you actually can't think much beyond the actual physical pain that you're in, because all your mind can do is just think about the pain that you're in. But that happens too, right? When we're in emotional pain, when we've got a painful situation going on and we can't get it out of our head, we've got all these other things in our life going on, but all we can think about is the way that relationship's breaking down. All we can think about is that financial difficulty that we don't know how we're going to get out of. All we can think about is the fact that person's been saying that stuff behind our back and it's going to that person and that person and that person. And despite everything else going on, our world shrinks down to the size of our pain. And here's John in a prison, and he starts asking the question, does Jesus really care? Is he really God? Is he the Messiah that I am so sure he was? Or should we be looking for someone else? And I just want to say, if you're here, that can often be our experience, right? When we're in this place where we're asking God for a miracle, where we're believing God's going to do something miraculous, and we've been praying and we've been praying and we've even been fasting and we've been trying and we're just doing all we possibly can on our end, and the miracle doesn't come, and then maybe it's too late for that miracle to come. It's so easy to just say, God, are you really real? This is what Joni was experiencing in her account, right? Are you able to? Because either you're not good because you don't care about this, or you're not real because you're not doing anything. And have my prayers, like Joni's prayers, been going out into the universe and not to the ears of a loving God. And we get to a place like John is and saying, okay, God, are you even there? And so these disciples, they go to Jesus and they ask what John asked. And they come to Jesus, and this is what Jesus says, hey, why don't you send this message back to John? He says, go back to John and tell him what you have heard and seen. He says, go back to John and tell John what you've heard and what you've seen. And then Jesus lists out a few things. He says, the blind see, the lame walk, those with leprosy are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised to life, and good news is being preached to the poor. Jesus says to these disciples of John, John's friends who have come on his behalf to ask Jesus, are you the one? Jesus says, hey, go back and tell them what you've seen, what you've heard. And this is so interesting. This is so powerful, because I think this is the advice that we need to hold on to when we're in a place where God isn't answering our prayers, when we can't see beyond the unanswered prayers, when we can't see beyond the pain or the hurt or the doubt that we're in. Jesus' response is, no, you've got to have people tell you what they've seen, what they've heard. And this is what I think this means. When it comes to what is it you've heard, we've got to be able to look outside and reflect. We've got to look beyond the prison that we find ourselves in and see what God is doing elsewhere. You know, the interesting thing about our faith is that so often, and we would never say this, but it's the reality of how we live sometimes, is our faith can be so circumstantial. But when our circumstances are good, we think God is faithful. And when our circumstances are not good, we think, what's up with God? But it's so selfish. Because if you look at so many places around the world and so much of what's going on around the world, and there's all this pain and there's all this hurt and there's all this suffering and all this stuff that's happening there, and we'll often be like, well, I'll pray about that, but it's not going to change my faith. Right? You've done that. You've read about maybe what's going on in Gaza, and you're like, man, I've got to pray for these people that aren't being fed. That's horrific. I've got to pray. I've heard about the war that's going on around Ukraine and Russia, and these people that are losing lives, and these people that are missing out, and people that have been evacuated from homes, and I'm going to pray about it. right? But it's not really shifting my faith. But then when something happens in your life, and your circumstances shift, all of a sudden our faith's like up in the air. It's like, hang on a minute. It's so selfish because when other people go through pain, we're happy to pray for them and it doesn't affect our faith. But when we go through pain, it's like, hang on a minute, is God even real? It's just an interesting thing. And Jesus says, hey, no, what you got to do, John? What is it you've heard? You got to look outside. You got to look beyond your prison and see what's happening out there. Because out there, the blind are being able to see. The lame are walking. Those with leprosy are cured. Those who were deaf can now hear. The dead are being raised to life. And John, the good news is being proclaimed to the poor. John, just don't look at the walls of your prison. Your faith has got to be so much bigger than the pain and the prison that you're in right now. It's got to be able to look beyond that. And he says, just look outside and reflect. I mean, you're in a place where God's not answering your prayers, where you feel that your prayers are being missed. One of the best things we can do is look outside of our circumstances and reflect on what God's doing out there. Just report of what you've heard and what you've seen. That we're in that prison, some of the times the best thing we can do is to look back and remember. Look back on your life and remember the time where you saw God's faithfulness. I wonder how excited John was the day that he baptized Jesus and he saw the Holy Spirit come down like a dove. I wonder if he slept that night or he was just so pumped from the incredible experience that took place on the river that day that he was just like, wow, this is so cool. And he's just telling everyone about it. Like, I just imagine being there on an experience like that. It'd be pretty hard to sleep. I think you'd be so wide, you'd be so buzzed, you'd be so certain of what took place that it would just be like, wow. And again, if you're here and you're a person of faith, you can often go back to moments in your life where this sort of thing took place, right? Where you're just so certain God was there, where you just so knew God came through. And if you're here and you're trying to figure out faith, that might sound a little weird. That might sound, okay, what's going on here? And I just encourage you just to keep seeking, just to keep searching, because I think that those moments, those times will come. But I know that there's a lot of people in this room that are people of faith, and they can take you back to moments where you're like, man, how could I ever doubt God? Because I knew back then when I was 17 years old, because I knew there when I was 22 years old, because I knew in the midst of that thing when I was 43 years old what was going on, and when God was so present. And when you're in that prison, when you're in that place where God's not answering your prayers, it's so easy to let our circumstances eat away at our faith. But I think just like Jesus reminded John the Baptist, Lord, what have you heard? What have you seen? He's got to say to us, what have we heard? What have we seen? What's happening out there that we're hearing about? What have we seen in our past that reminds us of God's faithfulness? And so he says to these guys, hey, go back and tell John what you've heard, what you've seen. Lists off all these things. And I think just as they're about to walk away, it says, and he added, and Jesus added, and he said this, he said, God blesses those who do not fall away because of me. God blesses those who do not fall away because of me. This is so profound. This is so special because Jesus is saying to go back and tell John, blessed are those who do not fall away. Blessed are those who do not walk away. Blessed are those who do not stumble out of faith on account of me. Or, blessed are those who do not fall away from their faith because I didn't do what they thought I should do. Blessed are those who don't give up on their faith because of circumstances, because I didn't come through in the way they thought I could or the way that they thought I should. What Jesus is saying here is we've got to just hold on to this, I think. We've got to hold on to this idea. Blessed is anyone. Blessed are you, blessed am I, who does not stumble on account of Jesus. Blessed are us who do not stumble on account of Jesus. And what's interesting is this whole situation was going on, and Jesus' disciples were all within aware of it. Jesus' disciples would have known exactly what was taking place. They would have known that John the Baptist was over here in prison, and they still followed him. They would have seen that this was someone that Jesus cared so much about, and yet his circumstances sucked. And they still held on to their faith. And so John the Baptist in prison. John the Baptist no doubt wanted out of prison. John the Baptist no doubt had the knowledge to know that Jesus could come and take him out of prison. And in fact, a lot of the words, the lines that Jesus quoted back to John the Baptist is a reflection of what Jesus said when after he'd been baptized, he'd gone into the wilderness for 40 days. He came back and he announced his public ministry by reading from the scroll of Isaiah. And then he read from the scroll of Isaiah to say what he was going to do. And he was going to give good news to the poor. And the stuff was going to happen. A lot of stuff he wrote there were things that come straight out of Isaiah 61. One of the things that's in Isaiah 61 that Jesus doesn't quote there is that he was going to set the captives free. I wonder if John the Baptist was well aware of this, saying, well, you said you're going to set the captives free. I'm a captive. If any captive deserves to be free, it's me, because I've done nothing wrong. I've only told people, about your law. What's going on here? But then, look at how the story ends. Look at where things go. Mark records this for us. He says, Herodias' chance finally came on Herod's birthday. Herod gave a party for his high government officials, army officers, and the leading citizens of Galilee. He had all the highwigs in town, all of those people that had influence and power all come together for a massive party that he no doubt just went all out on. Then his daughter, also named Herodias, came in and performed a dance that greatly pleased Herod and his guests. Ask me for anything you like, the king said to the girl, and I'll give it to you. He even vowed, I will give you whatever you ask, up to half my kingdom. Then this girl, most likely a teenager, ran out and did what no other teenager's ever done in the history of the earth. She went and asked her mother, what should I ask for? Her mother told her, ask for the head of John the Baptist. So the girl hurried back to the king and told him, I want the head of John the Baptist right now on a tray. Then the king deeply regretted what he had said. But because of the vows he had made in front of his guests, he couldn't refuse her. So he immediately sent an executioner to the prison to cut off John's head and bring it to him. The soldier beheaded John in the prison, brought his head on a tray, and gave it to the girl, who took it to her mother. That's how the story ends. Of the person whom Jesus said was the GOAT. That he was the greatest. Jesus left him in prison, where a guard went and cut his head off with a sword. That's not the way you'd think the story would finish, right? If this was the GOAT, if this was a person Jesus cared about. But it's the way the story finished. What's interesting, what's fascinating, is that none of Jesus' disciples turned their back on Jesus because of this. Because their faith wasn't dependent on what Jesus would do for them now, because they knew what Jesus had done for them on the cross. And this is hard for us to understand, and this is hard for us to wrap our heads around. But the reality is, God performs miracles at His discretion in order to accomplish His purposes. And if you're in a place where you're praying for the miracle, don't stop praying for the miracle. Like we said last week, when we ask God to do the miracles, we are bringing honor to Him. We are saying, you are the only one who is capable. You are the only one who could. When we ask Him to bend the laws of nature, to reverse the laws of nature on our behalf, we're saying, God, you are the one who is powerful, and we're going to continue to ask you to do this. And keep asking and keep asking and keep asking. I urge you and implore you to do that. But when you're in that place, like Joni's in that place of just resting, going, okay, God, you could, but why aren't you? The most powerful thing we can do is say, what is it we're hearing? What is God doing outside of these prison walls? How can I look beyond my pain to see the faithfulness of God? And how can I look back and remember those times when God's faithfulness has been so evident and so prevalent in my life? I'm going to ask a couple of our team to come up, Bex and Nate. And they're going to just perform a song for us. It's called Hills and Valleys. And it's an incredible song. And we've talked about some not so much fun stuff today. We've read an account of an incredible man who lost his life, and we can look at it and think, man, Jesus should have done something. And the truth is, as we go through life, we're all going to ask God to do some things that we know He could, and we deeply believe that He should. And sometimes He will. But I think we're all going to have the experience when He doesn't. But in the midst of that, we want to do what the song suggests. Believe that He is the God of the mountain and the valleys. Thanks, guys.